Section D, notices of motion. Public health and D.21.13, Public Health and Wellbeing Amendment, Pandemic Management Bill 2021. Councillor King.
Thank you, Ms Mayor. I'd like to move that Council urgently write to all members of the Victorian Parliament, so MLA and the MLC, upper and lower house, to express our opposition to the proposed Public Health and Wellbeing Amendment, Pandemic Management Bill 2021.
Second the motion. Yeah.
Councillor Moore or Councillor Moore? Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you, Ms Mayor. Councillors, I bring this notice of motion to the Chamber today because the proposed Public Health and Wellbeing Amendment Pandemic Management Bill 2021 is a direct threat to freedom in our community and will directly impact the people of our municipality. If legislated, this bill will mean living with the types of controls and regulations we have experienced in the last 18 months or so indefinitely at the whim of the Premier. I'm not bringing this as some sort of extreme right-wing anti-vaxxer political activist. Parts of the media would have you believe that I and the other 100,000 people that protested in Melbourne on the weekend are just that. Rather, I'm a concerned citizen asking you, my fellow councillors, to draw a line in the sand, take a stand and publicly represent your community to say that enough is enough of this government control in our lives. We experience it in other areas of local government, in planning, in waste and environmental regulations, in management of our waterways, just to name a few, where decisions are made with little or no consideration of local knowledge or local issues. This matter is urgent. The bill has been introduced in the Victorian Parliament and has already passed the lower house and will be voted on by the upper house in the coming days. In the agenda, I provided a link to the proposed bill in its entirety and commentary from the Victorian Bar with their significant concerns. And rather than quote items verbatim, I trust that you have familiarised yourselves with the bill and the concerns raised by legal professionals, now including the Law Institute of Victoria, representing another 20,000 members of the legal profession. The bill, amongst other things, allows the Premier of Victoria a captain's call on all things relating to a pandemic declaration, whether or not a pandemic disease actually exists in Victoria, and without defining what the pandemic even is, bypassing any parliamentary input and allowing indefinite declaration of a pandemic emergency. It would allow democratic decision-making to be bypassed, human rights to be trampled, and the people responsible made accountable to nobody. The bill gives power to the Health Minister to be able to make any order without any parliamentary oversight. They will also be allowed to discriminate against people because of protected attributes such as their race, gender, religion, and political beliefs. Pandemic orders can be applied to specific classes of people and allow for forced detention, quarantining, medical examination, and testing. There's much more I could say, but I'll wrap it up. If this bill becomes legislation, it will affect our municipality and it will affect our communities. All of the restrictions that have unfortunately become commonplace in the last 18 months or so could, and most likely will, be enforced at the whim of the Premier. Business interruption, cancellation of community sport, schools shut down, the list goes on and on and on. This will become a normal way of life. Our municipality and all the people within it could become one of the classes of people specifically targeted by this legislation. We should not accept that this is normal. I accept that making a public statement like this on behalf of council may be uncomfortable and may be beyond what you think you signed up for when you became a councillor. But any government policy that seeks to indefinitely interrupt the lives of the people in our communities, the businesses in our communities, and the freedom of our communities must be opposed. I urge councillors to consider taking a stand on this issue and send a clear message to our state leaders that we have had enough of them squashing our spirits, extinguishing small business entrepreneurialism, and controlling our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Bell. First, at the outset, I'd like to say I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've had more vaccines than most people, I'd say, including Q fever and the occasional while drenching the sheep, 5 in 1, 6 in 1. I won't ever get cheesy gland. And I would normally not partake in a political, what is ostensibly a political debate. But the management of the pandemic in the last few months is starting to divide our communities, and that division isn't good. It should be the role of us here on the ground, that our state government, our leaders, to unite us and to keep us going forward in a way that, this is a huge challenge, the pandemic. It's a huge challenge, and how we manage it and how our lawmakers manage it now and into the future will have a big bearing on what sort of society we actually become, because at the moment it's becoming very divided, and these new powers look like they will, certainly without changes, will divide it even further. There's a notion in various levels of government, federal, state and local, of the separation of powers. That separation of powers is about the people who make the laws, that is the Parliament, is separate from those who enforce the laws. And I feel this legislation is breaking that system down. It's becoming more direct, and at a point that I can't see anything good can come of it. Even if this Parliament or the current government goes through and doesn't do anything dastardly, this will be there for the next government or the next government after that without change. If there's not a sunset clause put in here, we don't know what we're exposing ourselves to down in the future. It appears to be a very blunt instrument. I think in terms of a united approach that will actually unite us in this pandemic fight and provide options. So I'm sure there are options to manage the pandemic and get people vaccinated or antiviral medication or whatever. Bring the people together. Let us all go together and get these options together rather than divide us as a community, because that is what's happening on the ground. The community is being divided at a lot of levels. Father against son, mother against daughter, family against family, neighbour against neighbour. And that just can't be good. It can't be good for us as a community going forward. And so I'm going to support this motion on the grounds that it just really needs a sunset clause or certainly a massive alteration or something like that, and a means that actually unites us and takes us through this pandemic and gets us out the other side. And hopefully we won't see another pandemic for another God knows how many years. But I'd rather see a uniting approach rather than a divisive approach, which is just what it seems to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'll speak for the motion. Thank you. There's a lot in the Act, and I don't profess to know it all, but I have read what I can read of it. I'm certainly not aware of what changes were made overnight. I haven't had time to read up on that or what was proposed when amended. I think the main concern to me is with this no independent body monitoring the decisions or to override the decisions. The concerns, particularly against our local bar, AQCs, who are top legal experts, and the concerns that they've raised about the bill and the lack of independent oversight. And under the law is that the proposal could be detained, arrested, it could be the movement can be restricted, which it currently is, forced to undergo medical examinations or medical testing because by any reason you're specifically targeting an individual or a specific group of people, in this case unvaccinated people. I'm vaccinated, most of my family are vaccinated, and I'm happy with that. When the virus came about, we were talking about herd immunity of 80 to 90% to protect all the well-being of all our people, and that's in place with chickenpox, common flu, or the other type of viruses around. We're up 95%, so it's just time to get back to some normality. And I do feel that the bill that was put up is just giving too much power to too few people with no independent oversight, and it's not good for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Any other speakers? Councillor McFadden.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Mayor. Look, it's an interesting motion. When I walked into the chamber today, I'm totally against this bill, personally. But I asked myself the question whether council should be involved in this type of thing before state parliament. I don't ask the state parliament to monitor how we run our ship, but And likewise, I don't expect to tell them how to run their shop. However, in saying that, early in the piece, when this first started, let's not look back at what's happened at the start of this pandemic. Every state has differed in its responses and how they've done it, how they've gone about it, what draconian laws they've put in place, whatever situation they've done, lockdowns, whatever. I said earlier in the piece, they needed to do some of those things because I believe this is like fighting a war. I have said that before. Fighting a pandemic is like fighting a war. Early in the piece, we were losing that war. But I can see the end of the tunnel now. We are nearly over. So we don't need these laws any longer. I think it's important as a council to let the members of Parliament in Spring Street know where we stand in relation to this, because it is such a emotive issue, and the fact that it is so draconian in the way that they are going about imposing these regulations and these laws onto us in the future. I don't think it's needed. The fact that we're nearly out of this pandemic, I think now's the time to say, let's get back to a life of some type of normality, whatever that be. But we need to move forward, as Councillor Moore said, as an Australia, not as Victoria, not as New South Wales, not as Queensland or any other state. We need to move forward as Australia. And unfortunately, through this whole process, the community has seen, through federation, how strong the states have it over the federal parliament. They have too much to say. Now may be the time to look at how Australia is governed into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPhee. Councillor Young?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Benham. I'd just like to say that I am vaccinated, so I have no issues with that, but I do believe that our community's had enough enforced restriction placed on it. People are unhappy. We need positivity and happiness now. I think mental health of the people is very important, and I don't think this bill is going to do anything to make that better. Our businesses need support. We need to move forward. Now is the time to do it. This legislation certainly does not allow us to do that. So I disagree with everything that everybody said, and I do agree that we should not support this legislation.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor McKay?
I love freedom. I think all Australians, in our constitution, in our the way we go about public life, the way we interact with one another, we love freedom. But we also make sacrifices for the public good. We do it when we pay our taxes. We do it when we obey the rules that are made by various governments. Early in the pandemic, the leader of the World Health Organization, Dr. Mike Ryan, who is a fabulous speaker, he said, go hard and go fast, and don't worry about making mistakes. So he acknowledged, after fighting Ebola and other epidemics, that mistakes would be made in how they would be handled. But if you didn't do and act quickly, it gets out of your control. We've been very fortunate, and the other thing that he said was that, and no one will thank you for it, because what they see on the ground is they don't see any illness, because you've been effective. So our governments have been quite effective. All of them have made mistakes. The federal government's made mistakes, but they did a great thing in closing our border early. They made mistakes with their vaccine rollout, and hence we're behind. So many other countries were free 6 months ago, and that was a federal government thing. State governments, we can decry state governments. All the Western Australian people, they're not complaining. Very few of them are, mostly Clive Palmer's complaining, but the people there have been happily living their lives for 18 months in freedom and joy. The people in Queensland, they're also pretty happy. I think the people living there are largely quite free because their government has restricted movement and kept them acting. I mean, there are various perspectives, and I'm giving my perspective. I am not going to object to this bill. I don't see it as my place. I do believe what I would like to talk about is that I believe the reason that the vaccines have been mandated in the last month or two is that we have been behind. We want to open up. We're nearing the end. So to do that, you need to get the last 15% of people who have not been able to be vaccinated because there have been big delays. We've got some people living an hour and a half from a vaccination centre. we need to encourage all of those people as strongly as we can to become vaccinated so that we can be free, so that business can happen, so the harvest can happen and every packing shed can keep working throughout the season. And the vaccinations are working. The vaccinations are working as shown by we don't have anyone hospitalised. We've had outbreaks in communities and they haven't spread to any great degree in the last month, that there are less and less people in ICUs largely the people in ICUs are not vaccinated. The statistics prove that. I believe this has been a very politically heated debate. It has been easy to inflame the people against the current Premier, or because of lockdowns are very difficult. They're hugely difficult for business. I do have incredible sympathy for people in hospitality, for people in beauty, for people in various areas highly impacted. There are also, to be acknowledged though, other parts of our communities where industry and business are thriving and have done better than they have ever done.
Your 3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Councillor McKay.
So, just to elaborate, thank you. I'm finished.
Thank you. Councillor King, do you wish to close the debate?
Just briefly, thank you, Ms Mayor. Thank you, councillors, for your participation in the debate and support. I'm encouraged to hear other councillors notice things like division, draconian laws, and what we need in our community is unity. The end of community is unity. So by opposing this bill, by council taking a stand and opposing this bill, sends a message to the state government or to the state MPs that local government has had enough of being dictated to by the state government with legislation, policies and actions that seek to divide our communities and give no consideration to freedom, democracy and the Australian way of life. And I thank councillors for their participation in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. That closes the debate, so we'll take it to a vote. All those in favour of Councillor King's motion? All those against? The motion is carried.